everybody. Welcome to the Opening Bell, the NFL Stock Exchange podcast. I am Trevor Sikkema. With me is my co-host, Connor Rogers. And today we have a treat for you guys. We are breaking down all of the new GM and head coach signings around the NFL with an NFL draft twist. We're going to be looking at all of these official hirings, give you our thoughts on all of these guys, and then talk about what it means for the upcoming NFL draft. A little bit of free agency too, but it's basically going to be how do these new head coaches and GMs change the 2022 NFL draft. Connor, it's been a whirlwind of 2 weeks since the last time we spoke on this topic. Now we've got some official hirings. I'm excited to dig into this topic, man. This is one that you came up with, and I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I think, Trevor, so often we do this whole thing from, last May, right? Starting with mock drafts that you're attaching players to teams. And then in the middle of it, you get this giant roadblock, this giant speed bump where, and this year was very unique, where there's, 9 openings?
Yeah.
That can change everything. And nobody really breaks down how. They just start churning out mock drafts again. Nobody explains oh, this is the new scheme, or this is the play, for people you and I talk to, this is the kind of player this guy likes, this staff is going to like. So I think it's this giant, piece of the puzzle that is never really allocated time because we go, Super Bowl and then combine.
Yep.
It's not like, oh, we had the Senior Bowl with the hiring process, then the Super Bowl, and then the combine. So I'm really, this is like very nerd draft level stuff, and I cannot wait for today's show.
Yeah, we're definitely getting into the roots or the weeds or the whatever you want to call it with draft analysis here, because I think team reporters do a really good job of obviously breaking down new head coaches and new GMs for the teams that they cover. But man, and I'm certainly guilty of this too over the years. You're right. We make such a big deal out of these head coach and GM openings, and then once they get filled, we don't do the best job of coming back to them and saying, hey, here's what this means. You're right. We just go straight to the mock drafts. We just try to go straight to the good part. But in reality, we're going to try to give you as many details as we can throughout this entire draft process to where you're knowing your team and these prospects better than you ever have before. Before we dive into this, got to remind everybody that this show is sponsored by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is your go-to place for your over-under prop bets. There's one final big game of the NFL season left, and this is the one that's going to have the most prop bets for it. So all sorts of over-unders, how many interceptions Stafford's going to throw, how many touchdowns Joe Burrow's going to throw, how many rushing yards Joe Mixon's going to get, right? So many different over-unders. And if you feel like you could win some cheddar on some great bets, go to prizepicks.com, make it happen. If you haven't signed up over at prizepicks.com, you can do so. Use promo code PFF, because if you do, and then you deposit $20 into your account, you're going to get a free PFF Edge subscription. So if you don't have a PFF subscription yet, this is the perfect time to do it. Go win some cash on some over-unders and get a free PFF subscription. It's the best way to do that. All right, let's jump into it. Jump right into it. Las Vegas Raiders. This is the first team that we're going to start with. New head coach Josh McDaniels, the longtime offensive coordinator for the New England Patriots. And then their new general manager is Dave Ziegler, who actually has an interesting crossover with McDaniels that might lead to that quote-unquote Patriot way coming out west to Las Vegas. Connor, what did you think about both of these hires and then this pairing of these guys being together in Vegas?
There's a long history between these two, right? They played together at John Carroll University in Ohio, and they've kind of been together in the NFL for a while. Ziegler was working for the Broncos when McDaniels was a head coach there.
Yep.
And then McDaniels goes back to New England, and Ziegler's been a scout for New England for the last 9 years. Now, a little bit of an unconventional path, I would say, Trevor, where he was an assistant director for a bit and then was, regarded as the de facto GM when Nick Caserio moved on, which was very, very recently, but really was just the director of player personnel for about a year and is now a GM. So a guy that has been in the league long enough. But that's a big jump. I'll say it that way. That is not very common. You see a lot of guys go from assistant GM or VP of player personnel, roles that they've handled for a lot of years. And the really good organizations like the Colts under Chris Ballard, they'll give you a lot of different experience where if you've been a guy that's just been a scout your whole career, okay, let's get you involved in the contract side of free agency. If you've been somebody that's been a director of pro personnel where you're evaluating street free agents and obviously actual free agents for the bonanza that takes place in March, let's get you involved a little bit more in the college side when we go into April. So and I'm not saying what Ziegler did and didn't do in New England, but this is going to be a big step up for him. And it goes to show you how important it was to the top of the Las Vegas organization to get two guys that were going to work hand in hand. Now, I don't know what that says about the former dynamic between John Gruden and Mike Mayock, but all I knew coming into this Vegas GM coaching search was that it wasn't one and then the other. It was, we're hiring a pair. All we care about is getting it right as a pair. Two guys that have worked together, have the experience together. And like you said, Trevor, now we're going to see, is it going to be the Patriot way, which replicating that has not gone well basically anywhere else. But obviously, they were very high on the pairing of Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler.
Yeah, well, you and I talked a couple of weeks ago when we initially went over our podcast episode saying who we would like to see in both of these chairs, not just for the Raiders, but every opening in the NFL. And we talked about continuity being so important when it comes to building the right roster, whether it's through free agency or the NFL draft. And so it makes total sense why they would want to do this in this order. Have guys that they want to go after who have chemistry together. Now, do you pigeonhole yourself a little bit when you say, hey, we want guys that already have chemistry coming into it? Yeah, I guess so. And maybe that is the reason for such a steep jump for Ziegler coming over to the Raiders to be the GM now. Maybe I guess that goes into it a little bit, but you want that chemistry. I think that's really, really important. Now, when you go back to Ziegler's scouting days or when he was with the Denver Broncos at the same time McDaniels was there, these guys were both very young at the time. Ziegler was just a scout. I mean, he wasn't in charge of pro scouting or college scouting or anything like that. He was simply on the scouting staff for the Denver Broncos. And so I can't imagine he worked too hand in hand with McDaniels when McDaniels was the head coach, even though there was a little overlap there. But obviously plenty of overlap, plenty of conversations with them being in New England. Now, New England's system, it's hard to replicate, right? Because as everybody knows, Bill Belichick is the head coach, GM, decision maker, everything. He makes all the decisions. He has the control over that roster, whether it's free agency or the NFL draft or the depth chart or whatever it is. And so it's hard to look at even McDaniels, let alone Ziegler, and say, okay, what in their history are we going to take to say we can project some draft moves or maybe some draft tendencies? So it is tough. So you want to take this with a grain of salt, but they were still in the system, right? They were still in what the Patriots were doing. They were having a lot of success. And I can't imagine they're going to zig too far away from how the Patriots were zagging, if you will, with draft strategy. And when you look at the Patriots over the last almost 10 years now, the thing that stands out to me the most with their draft history is that they have drafted 14 box players, so either linebackers or defensive linemen, in the first 3 rounds since 2012. That is significant. You look at all of their top premium picks, if you will, and they are using it up front on the defensive line and at the linebacker level. Now, this is a defense that was very multiple throughout those last 10 years. They were 3-4, they were 4-3, they were throwing all different sorts of things at the pocket, a lot of versatile players, but they really wanted to make sure their defensive line was always as talented as it could be. So I think the defensive line is still going to be a major priority of this team. Maybe not this year because they have Yannick Ngakoue, they have Max Crosby, right? They have those guys there already. But as you look down the next couple of years, look for them to continually go to that well of box players. And something else that I noticed, they only had 10 offensive linemen drafted since 2012. Only 3 of them were drafted within those first 3, but only 3 of them were drafted. Now I can't even read my own handwriting. 10 offensive players total drafted since 2012. Only 3 of them were offensive linemen. There we go. That's a lot better way to do it. 2 of them were in the 3rd round. So they only had since 2012, right? New England Patriots, so much success in the world, only had 1 offensive lineman that they drafted in the 1st round. It was Isaiah Wynn. Now, they had Dante Scarnecchia, the GOAT, the godfather of offensive line coaches, to make up for a lot of maybe talent or draft round deficiencies that they may have had. So there's not a Dante Scarnecchia on the roster or on the coaching staff in Las Vegas. And so it'll be interesting to see how they navigate it. But Connor, I just thought that was really interesting when I looked at their draft history. Very, very, very heavy on the front 7, that defensive box, and very light on how they drafted not just offense, but especially offensive line. Very interesting to see if they continue that trend, emphasizing that defensive line moving forward.
I think they always will be that, Trevor, that the trenches are what matters to us. And I think with the offensive line numbers you pulled up, you nailed it, that it helps when you have a developer there, that you like the continuity on your offensive line, right? If you are trying to, and maybe this will happen in Vegas, if you're trying to develop your offensive line for the next 5 to 7 years, then maybe you're going to see a lot of premium capital allocated towards that early on. And then if you believe you have the staff in place and the scheme in place to develop that, that obviously teeters off years on after that because you have actual building blocks in place there. And I think that is something that New England believes in. They believe in having legitimate building blocks up front. We've seen it in the Belichick era for a long time, like you said, on the defensive side of the ball. And we've seen it on the offensive side of the ball as well. And obviously the thing with New England is they had the cheat code for a long time, that is Tom Brady, where maybe you felt like you could allocate more, capital for a long time on the defensive side of the ball because you had the greatest quarterback of all time that can always get the most out of whatever's around him. And you didn't feel like you needed to use those first and second round picks all the time. That's on skill guys. So I think that's what I'm curious to see, how McDaniels and Ziegler work together, when the promise to ownership in Las Vegas was, we are going to give you the best version of Derek Carr. And I think, fortunately for the Raiders, they do have pieces on offense, right? You have Darren Waller in his prime. I think the fact they have Foster Moreau there, you can see a lot of 2 tight end sets. I think Foster Moreau can play. I think when you look at wide receiver, obviously now there is a legit hole there. And if you listen to the mock draft show yesterday, we filled that. Jahan Dotson was the pick for the Raiders. They got the last of the big run on wide receivers. They got the speed element that they need. So I think they know they need a field stretcher because, and I just had this number up before, they're a team that they're going to come in and they're going to use play action, and they are going to establish the run with Josh Jacobs, and they are going to try to build a big, beefy, powerful offensive line. And, you look at them last year with Mac Jones in New England, they had play action on 14% of their plays. I think that number could even be up with the Raiders if you feel like you can establish that run game, but you do need that field stretcher that can win over the top, that you have a rounded out group. We know Waller can win short area and intermediate, and Foster Moreau can win short area. You have Hunter Renfrow, who's your slot guy that can definitely win short area and intermediate. I think that's what Brian Edwards is as well. So I think the one thing I outline when I look at the offense that's coming to Vegas, Trevor, is that they need speed. They truly, and that's not groundbreaking. I mean, it's not. We know the Raiders always look for speed, but now it's a clearly defined hole for this team. Yeah. And I don't know if that's going to be a free agency signing. Maybe it is, but if it's not, I think in those first 2 rounds, you have to take a field stretcher. I think this is a team, honestly, that can afford, if he falls, that can afford to take Jameson Williams and be patient because the reward can be so great for that offense.
Yeah, no, that could very well be the case. Let's move on to Chicago. Chicago getting Ryan Poles as the general manager there, longtime Kansas City Chief. And then Matt Eberflus, the defense coordinator from the Indianapolis Colts, coming over to be the head coach. What do we think about this pairing, Connor? What do you think about them individually and then both of these guys coming together as a package group?
Well, I understandably have questions of what is the development route of Justin Fields, right? Because you hired a defensive guy, right? It's kind of the same question as when the Jets hired Robert Saleh last year. Everyone was like, cool, that's great. Everybody likes Robert Saleh, and he has a proven track record of success. That's Matt Eberflus. Everybody likes Matt Eberflus, and he has a proven track record of success. But who is the guy developing the first-round quarterback that you are going to take, or now for the Bears that you just took? So that's the question that I'll just get out of the way. And actually talking about the players, Ryan Poles, offensive line background, we know that that's going to be the priority of this football team. Right. It has to be better for Justin Fields. I'm very curious what the future for this team is at wide receiver. They have the vertical guy in Darnell Mooney. Things have not gone as they had hoped for Allen Robinson. Do you look to go the volume route and maybe get 2 targets, one in free agency and one in the draft, that aren't number 1 kind of guys, but you feel like can help Justin Fields? And we did the mock draft, right? And they don't have a first round pick, but that second round pick, I believe you gave them Trevor Penning. They got a guy that can come in and start for you on the offensive line. I think that's what you're looking for the Bears with that top 40 pick. And you know what I wonder here is, are there veterans on the roster that they feel like they can trade to get back some draft capital that they are, to be fair to the Bears, yeah, you have Justin Fields coming back for year 2, but they are kind of starting over in a way. You have a GM with a clean slate. You have a head coach with a clean slate, but then you have a veteran-laden defense that you're wondering, okay, are these pieces for their long-term future, or do they see them as ways to acquire more capital? But I think what the Bears are going to do is to give Justin Fields the best chance possible is look fully in on how do they improve and develop an offensive line that's consistent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Justin Fields has to be priority number 1 for him, no doubt about it. And when you look at Ryan Poles, only 36 years old, man, that's pretty crazy that he is able to get to the GM spot at just 36 years old. We saw a youth movement, if you will, with head coaches, I think, more recently. It's not like it was unprecedented, right? John Madden got a job as a young head coach, and John Gruden was the same way when he got the head coach gig with the Buccaneers. And so it's not like it was unprecedented for younger guys to get head coaching gigs, but for GMs to be as young as they are now, I think that's really a testament to the youth movement and how much trust a lot of these organizations have in some of these younger, let's just face it, less experienced guys, right? Ryan Poles didn't work out in the NFL. Ended up getting in with the Chiefs very, very early on. He was 24 when I believe he got hired with the Chiefs. And so he's got 12 years of experience. So he's got over a decade in the NFL front office, but still just 36 years old is not a long time. However, I think that what was really alluring about him, and you kind of mentioned, maybe this is missing with Ziegler, was the well-roundedness of what Ryan Poles has done with the Kansas City Chiefs. He has made it through 3 general manager hires and not just survived all of them, been promoted by each of them during that time. So, when you look at Scott, he was kind of the contract guy under Scott Pioli. He was more of a scouting talent evaluator during John Dorsey's time there. And then with Brett Veach, he was the big draft guy with Veach. He was kind of Brett Veach's right-hand man, right? Was able to orchestrate a lot of the draft boards that they have there. So I think that's what gives you faith in Ryan Poles really being able to make some great decisions, is that his resume, where there aren't as many years as you would expect, or the age just isn't as high as you would think for the experience in the NFL. It's very well-rounded. He's got a lot of things that he has done in an NFL front office. As for Eberflus, I think the big emphasis for him, certainly on the offensive side of the ball, I think that's kind of to be determined, right? Because Eberflus has always just been a defensive guy. So when it comes to projecting what might be for some Bears defensive talent that they will acquire via free agency or the NFL draft, man, I think it's just going to come down to just smart football players. And that just might be something that's silly to say out loud because, we all want smart football players, right? We all want football players with high IQ who know the plays to make it and all of those natural instincts, everything like that. But when you look at who some of his cornerstone pieces have been, those guys that have really taken his defense to the next level in Indianapolis, it's Darius Leonard, it's Kenny Moore, it's Julian Blackmon. It's these guys that they ain't checking any boxes athletically. They ain't checking any boxes size-wise. There aren't these thresholds that they're hitting. But you know what they are? Really freaking smart, really instinctual football players. And so we're going to go through some of these teams, and we've just seen it around the NFL where some guy, you mentioned it yesterday with Todd Bowles when we were talking about what kind of corner Todd Bowles might want for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we said, well, Andrew Booth fits the athleticism and the arm length thresholds that Bowles has often operated on there. I don't know if there's any of those thresholds that exist with Matt Eberflus. I really do just think that he's going after really smart football players. That is what his number one trait is with any of these guys. And so for offensive purposes, I think that Poles is definitely going to run through the offensive line. I think you're totally right there. That's where the emphasis on a lot of their premium picks and premium capital is going to go on that side of the ball. But on defense, I think you're definitely going to see an emphasis towards maybe not the most athletic guys, maybe not the biggest, the longest, the good frame kind of a players. There's not going to be this threshold. If he can hit both, of course he would want to, but intelligence, football intelligence, smarts is going to be top priority for Eberflus as he starts to add talent to this roster.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think sometimes the overall message of that is you're not looking to be, the flashiest or the sexiest kind of defense. You're looking to be the most responsible. That's, you're trying to be the most responsible. And those are often the wave 2 and 3 or maybe even tier 4 kind of free agent signings that nobody cares about. Sometimes the national insiders don't even report them. They're reported by the local beat, and the fans go, cool, I don't really know much about that guy. And then they're a legitimate starter for you that just gets the job done in and week out. And Eberflus has done that for the Colts for a long time. He's been able to You're right. Darius Leonard is a star. There's no doubt about that. They do have really good players, but there's a lot of spots that they were able to get by with day 3 picks or guys that were, even undrafted and developed. So I think for the Bears, their identity will be we can get the most out of what we need from our defense without pumping in an insane amount of money, which has been the opposite of the former regime, right? This is a regime that traded for, coming off a regime, the big Khalil Mack trade and a ton of money dumped into him, a ton of money dumped into Robert Quinn, who are both great football players. There's nothing wrong with them. But now I think you're going to see the pendulum swing the other way where they got some money to play with, right? I think after some cuts, they'll be able to, go in with at least $30 million in cap space. And maybe you're able to armor Justin Fields with that cap space because you just don't have a lot of draft capital at the top of the draft that what you're getting. You're kind of playing the waiting game there, obviously, and with a top 40 pick, but you still are waiting a long time where you're going to have to do your offensive firepower and damage in free agency.
Yep. No, I'm very fascinated to see the Bears over the next couple of years because this is definitely a team, if we're doing like stock up, stock downs on these situations, I'm big time stock up on what the Bears are able to do. It's true. It's true, man. I mean, you've got a new regime coming with the Minnesota Vikings as well. Who knows what's going on there, depending on what happens with Kirk Cousins. We'll get to that in a second. Obviously, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. The Green Bay Packers have owned that division for the last couple of years, but that might be coming to its end. Detroit Lions are a couple of years away still. Man, I just think the Bears can be right there, man. I think that I genuinely look at their situation, and I think this could be a quick turnaround for the Chicago Bears. We're going to get to the Minnesota Vikings and what their situation is next. But before we get there, got to do everybody's favorite ad read. Roses are red, violets are blue. Don't let a wild pube wreck you. Valentine's Day is just around the corner, and our sponsors at Manscaped are here for you with the best tools to get your balls ready for the special occasion. This Valentine's Day, it's time to join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped, the leader in below-the-waist grooming, with our exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com, use the promo code PFF for 20% off and free shipping. The holidays went by so quickly. Do you remember to take care of your own packages while you were packing up everybody else's with the best tools for the job? The Performance Package 4.0 from Manscaped is just the thing that every guy needs in their life to make each day a little more special. Get 20% off and free shipping with the promo code PFF at manscaped.com. That is 20% off and free shipping over manscaped.com by using the promo code PFF. Join Cupid and shoot your arrow with Manscaped this Valentine's Day. All right, I teased it. Minnesota Vikings. That was the next team. That was the next team that we were going to anyways, which is a beautiful transition by you, Connor. That was absolutely flawless going from Chicago Bears straight into the Minnesota Vikings.
Take command of your Valentine's Day. Washington Commanders, shout out.
Anybody missed the podcast yesterday needs to go back and listen to that reference. New head coach Kevin O'Connell was the offensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams. Essentially was in the same room as Sean McVay once, so we knew that he was destined to be an NFL head coach someday. And their new general manager, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, who is I want to say big brain is a cliche because he's an extremely smart guy, and that's a lot of reason why he was able to climb the ladder. But that was true, man. Right-hand man to Andrew Berry in the Cleveland Browns front office over the last couple of years has a very interesting climb up the NFL ladder. Those two guys now in charge for the Minnesota Vikings. Connor, what do you think about these guys in this situation now that they're in control?
Well, one, I think this might be one of the most promising duos we've seen hired in a while. And a lot of people, don't know a lot about O'Connell yet. And even Adofo-Mensah, they probably don't know a lot about either. But I like that they went with two young, hungry guys that are willing to, use everything around them to make everything much better. And what I mean by that is, these are two that are, I hate this cliche, but they really are, they've been around where the game is going, right? When you look at Adofo-Mensah, he was with a Cleveland organization that went from the really old traditional way of building a roster with Dorsey, and then obviously to Berry, where it was, of course, tape, analytics, and a scheme under Stefanski that is obviously very popular and successful in today's NFL. And then you look at O'Connell, like that with the last 2 years with the Rams under McVay, he's seen a bit of the same thing. So I think the direction is the right direction. Now, what I'll say here, Trevor, this might be, bold, debatable, not well received. If I were the Vikings this year, and probably not a good time to bring this up with everything going on, obviously with the Brian Flores lawsuit with tanking. And I'm not saying the word tanking, but what I'm saying is you got a free year here if you're this duo. Kirk Cousins is not your future. If you could trade him with that massive cap hit, trade him. Why not just roll Kellen Mond out there for the year and have your eyes on CJ Stroud and Bryce at this point? I know that's not okay. My point is, if you can do that and get one of those two young quarterbacks, you can own this division for a long time.
Yeah.
And I know it's impossible to think that way. It's hard to sell to the fans, especially a team that's won for so long. They've won it, they've been successful. But if you do your evals and you see something in Bryce Young or CJ Stroud that you think is worthy of your franchise, then what are we doing here with this last year of Kirk Cousins? And maybe O'Connell really likes him, and they have a good year with Cousins, and they win 9 games, and they sneak into the playoffs, and they get bounced in the first 2 rounds. And then you're starting it all over again with less job security, maybe, because that clock starts to tick on how you're setting up the future. So I look at them and just go, they are the most fascinating situation to me out of all the new hires, because I don't know if they're going to go all in on a rebuild or all in on winning right away. And I don't think there's necessarily a right answer, but I find it interesting with the Vikings that we're not talking enough about them as a team that maybe these new guys don't view Cousins as this long-term, and they think they can get more. And I'll close it out with one thought on Adofo-Mensah.
Yeah.
I think that we need to stop doing this collective charade that when a guy is hired that doesn't have a traditional football background, that he's an analytics guy. I think it's really unfair to the candidate that we're constantly in this world of, oh, he didn't play offensive line in college for 4 years and then wasn't an area, didn't fetch coffees for 5 years and then wasn't an area scout for 10 and then wasn't a director for 5 and then an assistant GM for 3. Oh, he's an analytics guy. Oh, he's young. He worked on Wall Street. He's an analytics guy.
Well, I do think Adofo-Mensah is an analytics guy.
But that's good. That's a good thing. But I also think what they've done in Cleveland, I'm saying that they're more rounded than they get credit for. I think what they've done in Cleveland is balanced analytics and film and athletic testing almost perfectly at this point.
Now I know what you're saying. Okay, so that part makes sense, because
I think it's unfair to the candidate or the hire.
He did start his football journey, obviously, in the research and development department, and he does a ton of really great stuff with data. But you are saying that he's more than just a numbers dude. Like, he is an actual qualified guy who could be a general manager, being around front office for a long time.
He's not building the team off an Excel sheet with one formula, is my point.
I mean, he might be building the team off an Excel sheet, but I totally understand what you're saying. He's more well-rounded than that. You're right. He deserves more credit for his football IQ than just saying that he's just a data guy.
His path was different, so that doesn't just mean he's a numbers guy.
Right. He can be a fully well-rounded general manager candidate at this point in time. You're totally right. Before we move too far away from Kirk Cousins, I think it's absolutely hilarious that, according to Over the Cap, if they were to cut Kirk Cousins, he would be all $45 million on the cap. They would save absolutely $0.
Okay, so you're not doing that.
But they can trade him, and if they trade him, then he's only $10 million on the cap. And they would save $35 million if they could find a trade partner for him, but I doubt.
So that's the only way, which means he's probably playing for the Vikings next year.
So I have this quote from Jeremy Fowler, who is an NFL reporter, and he said this. This is from a tweet from him. Quote: "Soon to be Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell, which is now official, conveyed a firm belief in Kirk Cousins during the interview process. I am told he's high on him. The front office must decide on Cousins' future. He's due his $45 million cap hit, but many coaches interviewed for the job liked Cousins, O'Connell included." And so O'Connell had 1 year where he was actually the quarterback's coach in Washington, the final year that Kirk Cousins was there. So these two have worked together, but he's also seen the other side of things, right? Being the offensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams, he was there when they traded Jared Goff, and not just traded Jared Goff, desperately got him off the roster, right? They upgraded with Matthew Stafford, but in order to do so, they had to give away 2 first-round picks just to go make that little upgrade, because the Los Angeles Rams saw the ceiling in Jared Goff. So that makes me think that just because Kevin O'Connell said that he could work with Kirk Cousins, which, let's face it, It's a loaded question anyways, because the Vikings can't move on from Kirk Cousins. So if you said to yourself, yeah, I can't work. If you said to your bosses, yeah, I can't work with the guy that you owe $45 million, you're probably not getting the job, right?
No, you're not. So you say what they want they want to hear.
You say what they need to hear to hire you, and then in the back of your mind, you have full freedom to reevaluate the situation a year from now, and they could very well just move on from Kirk Cousins like it's nothing. So him saying that he wanted to work with Kirk Cousins could simply just be a Mike McCarthy, yes, I watched every snap in the NFL last year, please hire me, Jerry Jones, kind of a move to make it happen.
I love analytics. I love math.
Yeah, his journey to PFF made a lot. Sorry, I just kind of took a shot there at my own company. When it comes to,
I always forget that.
He did the whole like came to PFF thing, which PFF always gets crap for that, but we do not.
Well, he didn't listen, so you guys don't deserve
right.
Crap.
We do not take any responsibility for any of the boneheaded, analytic-driven decisions that Mike McCarthy chooses or does not choose to make on the football field. Just had to throw that disclaimer in there. I think Kevin O'Connell is obviously very interesting, coming from the McVay background. I think he understands how to work with quarterbacks. He's been a quarterbacks coach before. I think that Kirk Cousins is going to be the guy next year. I'd love to see them get as savage as you kind of painted the picture there and maybe start telling him.
It's a scenario. I'm not necessarily pushing for it.
I see.
Yeah,
I'm pushing for it. Saying. So something about Adolfo Mensa, though, that a quote that I liked from him that I was reading in some research is, quote, analytics is all about evolution, not revolution. We take this framework that has been used for years and we're just applying it to different things. We're creating decision rules. We're determining how these decision rules will help us in the future. That's a quote that I really like by him. And another quote that I really, really liked is he said, quote, hope is not a strategy. There are lots of things that can occur in the future, and it is our job and obligation to study them, understand the risks, and choose a course of action that will put us in a situation no matter what happens. I think the quote, hope is not a strategy, is basically just for Kirk Cousins. I think that that's just for the Kirk Cousins situation. I really
and a Disney movie. It's a good quote.
Right. No, it is definitely.
Draft Day 2.
It reminds me of in the first Avengers movie, which question, are you a Marvel movie guy? I don't even know if you are.
Which is, I know, a huge problem that's going to present us.
Have you seen any of them?
The first one. The first Avengers. And I've seen like 2 Thor movies, and I like Spider-Man a lot. And I'm very jacked up for, and I know this is like now getting completely off the rails.
It's fine.
I am all in on the new Batman. But no, I'm like as behind as a human being can be on Marvel movies.
Okay, well, we need to get you up to speed, especially when we start doing mailbag stuffs, because I guarantee you're going to get the questions coming. But all that to say, in the first Avengers movie, which you have seen,
yes,
Dr. Banner said, Dr. Banner says a quote. He says, a light for all mankind to see, and he actually says the line, I think that was for you, and points at Tony. And when Adolfo Mensa says, quote, hope is not a strategy, I say, I think that was for you. And I'm pointing straight to Kirk Cousins. I really do think that that's the situation to kind of bring it all back to reality here. I don't think that they're going to just pigeonhole themselves into Kirk Cousins. I think that they truly are going to give it this 1 year, see what happens with Kevin O'Connell. But I think that they are already behind the 8 ball. I think no matter what, this is Kirk Cousins' final year with the Minnesota Vikings. I don't see anyone trading for him in that massive contract. So I think that he is still in Minnesota this year. I think Minnesota will be fine with him. I think they will be competitive. And I think at the end of the year, they will assess all of their situations and they will get extremely aggressive to upgrade a quarterback, just like the Los Angeles Rams did. That was a lot of words on the Minnesota Vikings. So I figured we should probably move on.
They're interesting, man. I'm excited to follow this new regime and curious how they handle quarterback of the future.
New York Giants, couple of New York guys, just a little north of the state in Buffalo, come down to the big city. Brian Daboll is the head coach now with the New York Giants, and Joe Shane, the general manager there. We talked a little bit about this before on the podcast, but Connor, what do you think about these two moving down from Buffalo, having that chemistry, and now being in New York with the Giants?
Well, it's a long drive. The Giants facility is right in my backyard, and I did my first drive to Buffalo last summer. So hopefully they flew them private. But
how long of a drive is it?
Oh, man. I mean, it could take you about 7 hours.
No
six and a half
way.
Hours.
Holy cow. I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah. You're
Damn.
driving across the entire state of New York. It's actually a really cool drive. So, I mean, listen, this is one that just almost made too much sense. I think everybody down around here felt both hires coming. Shane was their favorite pretty much out of the gate. And once you knew that they were going to hire Shane, you knew Dable was to follow as much as, I mean, Giants ownership really did love Brian Flores. They loved that he's from the state of New York. They loved what he did in Miami. I think there were serious conversations there, but if you hire Joe Shane, you obviously are going to let him make the coaching hire, and they went with Dable, who has, really rejuvenated his career after having some unsuccessful stints as an offensive coordinator earlier, and then he does the, New England, Alabama, and then obviously his big one with Buffalo, developing Josh Allen and the powerhouse offense that they had. So I think this one starts out so simple, Trevor. I think they are not, especially ownership, ready to move on from Daniel Jones. They internally think that they did not do right by him. And I think they also think that they haven't done right by Saquon Barkley. It just might be too late to fix that one. Sure. And when you look at those two variables, it's trench play. It's trench play. They're going to look at the offensive line. They know they have to improve the offensive line. They like the steps they saw from Andrew Thomas last year, but he's one piece. They need a lot more pieces. They are going to come in, build that foundation. Daniel Jones is going to have a chance to prove himself in that foundation with a better offensive line. I think they'll have another pass rusher on the defensive line as well with early draft capital. I think they'll look to get a tight end more in the mold, unlike Evan Ingram, that can block a little bit more and be a little bit more physically imposing team on offense. That's something they've lacked for a while as well. So it might be boring early going for the Giants, but you're going to see some foundational pieces, and you're going to see what the quarterback can do with them. And if he does fail within that structure, then they will be one of the many teams in 2023 looking for a quarterback.
I agree with you. I think this is definitely going to be a build through the trenches kind of team, build the foundation, if you will, to quote you right there. Since Shane has been the assistant GM in Buffalo, so he hasn't been the general manager making the final call, but he's been right there building the draft board, coming up with the draft strategy. Since 2017 is when he began as the assistant GM there in Buffalo, which he had his hand in college scouting and everything before that, so he can go further back. But 2021 draft, okay? Their first 4 picks, trench players. 2020, top pick was a defensive lineman. 2019, top 2 picks were trench players. 2018, Josh Allen, an inside linebacker, and a defensive lineman, right? I mean, going back to kind of what it was with the Patriots when we talked about Ziegler and McDaniels coming over. If we're copying anything from what New England did, if these guys are copying anything from what they did in Buffalo, the motto is going to be draft defense and develop offense. That's what it's going to be. A lot of their very top premium picks, more often than not, you're going to see along the defensive trenches and on the defensive side of things. You can go back even further when they drafted Trey White with their first overall selection at the back end of the first round. And so I think that that's what it's going to be. They're going to spend a lot of premium picks on defense in the draft. I think a lot of their offensive picks are going to come from day 2, rounds 2, 3, maybe even 4. You start signing free agents on the offensive side of the ball, making trades like they were able to do for Stephon Diggs. So I think that that's really going to be the strategy with these guys. And I think that's something that has worked well for them in Buffalo. And I think that that's going to be a trend that continues for them. That's what I think. I think the motto, draft defense, develop offense. That's what it's going to be for these two in Buffalo. In New York now. What about the Denver Broncos?
Easiest one on the board, brother.
George Payton is already the general manager. He was hired last year, so he wasn't going anywhere, but he is still new as a general manager. We're really to see him unleashed, if you will. Maybe this is the first year that we really get to see exactly what he wants to do. Nathaniel Hackett is their head coach now. So what do you think about that hire from Payton, kind of how they went about things, getting rid of Vic Fangio, and then the future of this team?
I think it says that they want to win right now. I think it says that this is the team on the list out of all the ones we're going through here, and the Raiders are the runner-up, that believes we're in this thing right now. And we have a coach that we know can bring an offense here that can elevate the biggest problem with our football team. We think our defense is absolutely ready to play in some big-time football games. We think we have one of the best young running backs in the entire NFL in Javonte Williams.
Yep.
We already locked up our wide receiver core with Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, and then you have Jerry Jeudy there who's waiting for the breakout. You got 2 tight ends that can play. The offensive line got better. Trevor, this one's easy. And we know how long Peyton waited to take a GM job. Nobody could pry him away from Minnesota. He denied interview after interview after interview. He took this job because he believed he can go there to win, felt like the roster was in the right place, felt like he could do a couple big things in the draft to get it where it needed to be. Now you got to finish it, man. The foundation's been set. The walls are up. You need to put a roof on this thing. And the roof is trading for a veteran superstar quarterback that can go win you a Super Bowl. And if it can't be Aaron Rodgers, which all indications of their process of this offseason should tell you that they're hoping it's Aaron Rodgers, then you got to tap into something else, whether that's Russell Wilson. You got to get creative here, or maybe you're the team that, if all else fails, maybe you do call about Kirk Cousins. Obviously, that's more plan C or D. Yeah, I know. I'm getting reeled down. The point is, Trevor, they're not taking like Sam Howell or Malik Willis and waiting 3 years to see if it works.
Yep.
They can't afford to do that, dude.
Yep. No, I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. They're picking at number 9 right now. I don't ultimately think that they pick at number 9. Something else is going to happen here. I personally believe that George Paton doesn't give a damn about his draft picks this year. I think that he would be ready to move on from his premium draft picks this year and his premium draft picks next year to either make Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, or Derek Carr in that order happen and get those guys in the building. Now, Derek Carr probably not going to happen because it's a divisional opponent.
That's
so
the issue.
That's the one that is probably the least likely to happen. It also gives them the least amount of upside, I think, when you throw out those quarterback names. So really, when you look at it, maybe realistically, Aaron Rodgers is at the top, and I think that that's the most plausible to make happen, especially because they have Hackett coming over from the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers loved getting to work with Nathaniel Hackett. When you look at, okay, he wasn't a play caller, Matt LaFleur was the play caller, but at the same time, we talked about this before on this podcast, Hackett was the one who designed a lot of the red zone plays, and the Packers were damn good in the red zone because of a lot of those plays and the things that worked. So, when you look at the pursuit of Aaron Rodgers, he's mulling over retirement, right? He thought about retirement last year, and I think Rodgers still has a couple years left in the tank. I really do. But does he want it to be in Green Bay? I'm not so sure that he does. And if he doesn't, he's going to pick the situation where he can win now immediately. And outside of maybe like Tampa, I guess, as another realistic spot for him to come in and just win right away, which I don't think that's going to happen. This is the one. I think he wants to be in Denver. I really do. And so, when it comes to draft strategy, I'm not exactly sure with Hackett because he's never been close to this position to really make decisions. George Paton has, and we saw last year he was into adding really good talent, and he kind of ignored the quarterback position a little bit. I think that Rodgers probably had something to do with that a little bit last year as well. But ultimately, you can look at this roster and look at some of the things that they need. Okay, maybe an inside linebacker, maybe a little extra offensive line help. It's about it. Maybe some defensive line help because you could always
use $40 million cap space. $40 million.
Yeah, dude, this is a no-brainer. I think this is a no-brainer. I don't even think they're looking to use their draft picks, and it's hard to say exactly how much this will impact drafts in the future because we don't really know what Peyton's tendencies are. We don't really know what Hackett's tendencies are. So instead, I'll just say I think they're looking to not use most of their premium draft picks this year, maybe even next year. They're looking to make a swing on a quarterback. They're looking to make a Super Bowl run. So I'm with you. I think that that's what happens with the Denver Broncos.
Go full Rams.
Yeah, I think that they're about to do it. I really think that they're about to do it. Miami Dolphins, Chris Greer is still in control. He's still the general manager down there in Miami, but their new head coach is Mike McDaniel, the former run game coordinator, offensive coordinator this past season for the San Francisco 49ers. He is within that Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay kind of tree. He was that wide receivers coach back with the Washington Redskins at the time when all of those guys were in that franchise. And so what do you think about this? We've talked about this. A lot of hope for this signing. When it was pointing in this direction, I think a lot of people got very, very excited for it. What do you think about McDaniel becoming the head coach in Miami?
Well, one, I think it was the right hire with what they were down to, right? They were never going to get Dable. They made the bold choice to fire Flores. And I think a lot of their feelings were that they were never going to figure it out on the offensive side of the ball with Flores, whether that's right or wrong. And then they got down to a candidate pool that was not great. Like Kellen Moore was not ready for this job. That's my opinion. I think what I can tell you about McDaniel is there is no denying he's a genius. And he has every bit as much to do with the offensive success that the 49ers have as Kyle Shanahan does. Kyle trusts him with a lot of things, and McDaniel is purely brilliant, honestly. The question marks McDaniel is going to have to answer is, can you overcome... I mean, ownership already seems like forced the staff to stay on him like that. And I know there's, conflicting reports. I've heard McDaniel would be open to go getting one of the many successful defensive coordinators out there. You have Fangio on the market. I think that would be great. We've already heard reports trickle in that the defensive staff might stay, and that's from ownership. They want the defensive staff to stay. So I think McDaniel has to overcome what's gone wrong in Miami for so long, and I don't know if anyone's good enough to do that. We'll see. I mean, Trevor, he has to make up for how many countless misses from Chris Greer and that scouting staff. You have to make up for ownership that's already requiring certain things of you to do with your coaching staff. And the biggest one, the elephant in the room, is you got to turn Tua into a serviceable starting quarterback.
Right.
And I don't know if anybody in the NFL can necessarily do that. If anyone can, McDaniel's got a shot. He's good enough to do that. Players love him. They'll play for him. He's got great energy. People love to work with him. But I'm curious to see what kind of hires he's granted to make that can get things right in that Miami building. But I think when you look at this one as a whole, there's a lot of obstacles. But Greer has to listen to McDaniel because you've missed on a lot of these offensive line picks already or ways to fix it. And McDaniel's gotten the most out of that offensive line in San Francisco. He knows how to evaluate guys that can get your run game going, which is going to be the best friend to Tua getting better. So if they truly listen to Mike McDaniel, this has a shot to work. This guy can coach it up on offense and get you points, but you got to move aside and give him a chance to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, who he brings in as a staff, how much he'll be able to, that's a big part of hiring a head coach, right? It's a lot of their Rolodex as well, the guys that they can bring in with them. Now, looks like there aren't a lot of spots in Miami. We'll see who he is able to bring in, some different positions that he's able to fill from his own contact list, if you will. But, man, when you look at what he's been able to do in San Francisco, best rush game in the NFL, and he's walking into a situation with the worst run blocking unit, 2 undrafted running backs, a 7th-round running back, and Duke Johnson, right? I mean, it's just there has not been a lot of talent infused in this run game from the Dolphins. Now, one might think, okay, well, if there's anybody who's going to get the most out of it, it's probably McDaniel because that is what he was been able to do in San Francisco. Like you said, I mean, you look at a late-round drafted guy like Elijah Mitchell and how well he has been able to play under McDaniel in that offense. And so I think that there's hope that you can make the most out of the group as it currently is, but you've got to infuse some extra talent in there. They've got to be able to invest some capital. When you look at guys like Mike McGlinchey, guys like Aaron Banks, those were 2 offensive linemen who were really good movers for their size. So I would expect athleticism to play a role in the O-line upgrades in the draft that they're going to have wherever they end up making those selections. It could be back end of the first round, could be at other spots too. But when you look at their current offensive line, guys that fit that narrative of being plus athletes along the trenches, you look at guys like Austin Jackson and Robert Hunt, who those are 2 guys the Dolphins drafted to hopefully play offensive tackle, but I think have clearly showed that they're more guards in the NFL. Austin Jackson played left guard this past season, and Robert Hunt played right guard this past season. So I think you have your 2 guards, and you're happy with their athletic profile there. But the rest of the offensive line, who knows, right? There's some decent offensive linemen out there, right? I mean, like they could sign Ryan Jensen if they wanted to.
Hey, Teron Armstead, man.
They
got the most cap space in the NFL.
Could definitely pay Teron Armstead to come down, and that would be obviously a fantastic athletic offensive tackle to make it happen. Maybe if you draft a good offensive lineman, maybe a Bernard Ryman at the back end of the first round, all of a sudden now you've got athletic left tackle, athletic right tackle, athletic left guard, athletic right guard. That's a lot better than what it was the previous season. That's a really good way to start. But I think that when you look at draft tendencies, that's probably where it's going to go there. They're going to emphasize those athletes along the offensive line, and they have to. But, your point's a good one. It's still Chris Greer who is in charge of the draft board, and maybe McDaniel will be able to sway him into some better offensive line picks here moving forward because it just hasn't been pretty. And you're right. I think the biggest element that he has to overcome is what you do with Tua Tagovailoa and whether or not he can make him a good quarterback or serviceable quarterback or a guy that you believe can be a franchise guy because, shoot, man, I say that out loud. I say a serviceable quarterback, but that ain't even good enough. I mean, unless Tua shows franchise quarterback ceiling, this guy was billed to be a franchise quarterback. He was picked before Justin Herbert. He was picked in the top 5. I mean, if he doesn't show franchise quarterback ceiling over the next year or two, they're going to move on. It doesn't even matter if he's solid. Like if he doesn't show a Super Bowl ceiling, they're going to move on from him, which would be huge. I mean, it would be a huge blemish in the Chris Greer general manager tenure. So, man, that might be tough. That's a lot for Mike McDaniel, a young head coach, to walk into and really handle.
I mean, they got to spend is the biggest thing, and they got to spend on offense. There's got to be a splash there, whether it's in Armstead for your offensive line, whether it's a Dalton Schultz, that we know how much they need blocking tight ends that can also impact the pass game.
Help.
I mean, you got it. The good thing is with McDaniel, he's going to get the most and the best out of Jalen Waddle. We saw it with Deebo Samuel this year. Waddle's frame is not the same, but the creative usage for Waddle will be expanded, and I think that's a really good sign. We know the Dolphins pick late in round 1, so with all that cap space, you got to make some big splashes to give McDaniel, a foundation on offense to build with, and give Tua a shot. That's all you could say about this situation.
And there were a handful of plays this past season where they put Waddle in the backfield.
So Waddle looks great this year.
It's not unprecedented, man. They could definitely kind of put him in. I hate saying like a Deebo role because Deebo is so unique, but you can get creative with Jalen Waddle. That's what I'll say about it. We talked about February 14th. We talked about Valentine's Day. Well, from now until February 14th, you can get 25% off any PFF subscription using the promo code SUPER25. What do you get with a PFF subscription? Well, glad you asked. You get all the locked article content that we have that displays all of the premium stats and data. You get the Green Line betting tool. You get the prop bets tool, which we said you could also use if you sign up for Prize Picks as well. You get the NFL draft guide. You get the fantasy football guide, and just so much more. You can look up a lot of these premium stats yourself. All the snap count splits, where guys are lining up, what scheme the teams are using, what coverage they're deploying, all that kind of stuff, man. Run game, everything. There's so much that you can get with a PFF Elite subscription. Go check it out over at pff.com. If you don't have a subscription right now, use promo code SUPER25 for 25% off any sub. But I'd encourage you to get the Elite sub because it's a really good deal for it and you get a lot of stuff. 2 more openings. We're not going to fully talk about the New Orleans Saints because they haven't hired a head coach yet, although we feel like it's going to be Dennis Allen. But the last 2 that we have to talk about that have been filled, Jacksonville Jaguars. Trent Baalke is still there as GM, but it sounds like there's going to be an EVP that's going to be hired to kind of like be above him, which might be Rick Spielman, who is the former general manager of the Minnesota Vikings. Could be somebody else. It's not official yet, but that's what we've heard. Their head coach, though, Doug Peterson, the former Super Bowl winning coach, not too long ago, 2017 with the Philadelphia Eagles. He was fired by the Eagles because, couldn't really work well with Howie Roseman. I feel like that's a common occurrence with Howie, a lot of people. But what do we think? What do we think about this from Doug Peterson, new spot in the Jacksonville Jaguars organization? Can he turn things around, Connor? Give Jags fans some good news, please. What do we have here?
I mean, considering how much of a joke their entire hiring process was, they actually came out of this, without egg on their face, right? Not totally embarrassed. I think Doug is a solid hire. I think he's the right person to work hand in hand with Trevor Lawrence. And I think most importantly, I think Doug is respected enough that the people that will come with him will be the most important part of this. If they can get Spielman in there, like you said, to be EVP, which means you're just keeping Baalke around because the owners like him as a person, they're not actually granting him football decisions. That, as crazy it is to say, that's a good sign.
Sure wish I could get paid for just being a good person.
The NFL is something, man. If you have some good friends in good places, you can make a lot of money and do not a lot of work. So... So when you look at that, I think that's a good sign. And I think that obviously, once again, they're sitting here with a lot of capital in general, whether it's financial capital, whether it's draft capital. I do think it's become, because of this process, maybe a little bit more difficult place to lure free agents compared to other situations. Like we talked about how much money Denver has, or even players will go sign and play for Mike McDaniel with Miami. But overall, I look at this team and think it's one of those simple ones where we're going to talk about getting a foundational piece for the offensive line with that number 1 pick if they can't trade it. And then I think you need a little bit more juice at wide receiver. And I think you do need to find a way, and this goes hand in hand with taking an offensive lineman number 1. I really do think you need to find a way to get a creative run game to help out Trevor Lawrence. Now, ETN coming back, I feel like people forgot he even exists. Like, that's a really good sign for Trevor Lawrence, getting ETN back next year. You know, how things went down with James Robinson this year is just terrible. Maybe they look for another workhorse back to pair with ETN behind a better offensive line, and then everything starts to click. And you know, once again, this is a team that could probably use a little bit more speed at wide receiver and get the play action vertical game going with Trevor Lawrence. So as bad as, you know, as uninspiring as this defense is, it's kind of like the Jets with Zach Wilson, right? The defense stunk. The Jaguars defense stunk. But all of that gets put on this back burner. None of it matters because, like the Jets with their former number 2 overall pick, it's the same with Trevor Lawrence, the former number 1 overall pick. You're just going to dump all the assets into helping him.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
that's what this hire was. And that's what Byron Leftwich would have been. Same thing.
And the hire had to be all about getting a guy who understands quarterbacks. And, you know, when we went through our head coach GM prediction episode a couple of weeks ago, you remember this was my guy. I wanted Doug Peterson in Jacksonville.
Before he even interviewed there.
That was before he even interviewed there. I said, this is the guy. This is the
I was like,
right
Trevor,
pick.
why would he take that job? And here he is.
Well, I think he takes the job because it's a good situation. He has Trevor Lawrence. Now you get Trent Baalke out of there. Now we're talking, right? You throw Rick Spielman in there. And if Rick Spielman's making all the decisions and Baalke doesn't really have any power at all, then all of a sudden Doug Peterson and Rick Spielman, I think that would be fantastic. Now, yeah, you look at this team and I think you could look at a couple of different positions on the defense that they would want to upgrade, but I hate to say it doesn't matter, but like it doesn't matter. You got the number 1 overall pick last year, and you had the true privilege and honor of drafting Trevor Lawrence. This dude's freaking good, okay? You cannot sit here. And, you know, I was doing research for it, and one of the things that I read, one of the articles talked about how Shad Khan and the rest of the decision makers with the Jaguars, they know
his son and Baalke. That's it.
Yeah, right. But like they came out kind of with the press conference after they hired Doug Peterson, and they were like, we know that this is not an overnight fix. We know that this is going to take some time. And it's just, they're not wrong, but it's infuriating, right? Because take your time means that you are going to be maybe at the beginning of your winning window when Trevor Lawrence is up for contract extension. You have wasted the whole Urban Meyer thing and the way that they're kicking the can down with Trent Baalke. It all spells out to me that they are going to finally get in a winning window just when they have to pay Trevor Lawrence mega money, $40 million a year. And where that's not a kiss of death, it's so crippling, especially for the fact that you had an incredibly talented number 1 overall pick quarterback in your lap that you could have then been having success for years and years and years. And shoot, man, maybe Doug Peterson's going to come in. Maybe he's going to be fantastic with Trevor Lawrence. Maybe they'll get great wide receivers. They'll draft good offensive linemen, and they could turn this bad boy around in 1 to 2 years. Maybe that's the case. But the reality is probably the fact that the Jags aren't going to fully compete for another 2-ish, 3 years. And 2-ish, 3 years, Connor, is year 4 and 5 of his rookie deal. So it's just, it's frustrating, man. The Jags are so frustrating because of everything that they went through with Urban Meyer and the incompetence that they have showed in the front office and decision-making over the last 5 to 6 years. And it's ultimately going to come out to, I fear, wasting one of the most talented quarterbacks that we've seen in the last decade. That sucks. That sucks. And I hate being super negative about it, but you know, if anybody was going to fix it, I think the situation is Spielman and Doug Peterson could. But it's hard not to look at the Jags situation and think, like, shit, man, like we had it. And hiring Urban Meyer burned so much of that timeline more than it needed to. It's just frustrating. They have to hit on so many other draft picks. They have to hit such a high percentage, and they've got to go out and acquire talent free agency over the next 2 years, or it's all going to be for naught. And
yeah, you're right.
It's frustrating.
It is frustrating. It's the only way this thing turns around is if you hit some home runs. And, you know, this is a team that's picking number 1 overall. This is a team that has the 33rd overall pick. Again, here we are again, Trevor. Like, they're right. This isn't new to them. This is the repeat of last year.
Yep.
And for the struggles that he had, the environment was a disaster. It's a laughingstock. And there's probably guys in there that are like, I can't come back here and take this seriously. And that's on Doug now. to turn that image around, and I think he's capable of doing that. They're lucky that they and Spielman to draft. If they hand this draft to Balky, just forget it. Forget it. It doesn't matter.
Not gonna go well.
It does not matter because Evan Neal at 1 or Ike Ekwonu at 1 or Charles Cross at 1, whoever it is, that's not enough. At 33, you need a home run. At 65, you need a damn good football player.
Yeah.
And that player needs to help Trevor Lawrence. So they have an internal problem that is not improving. And when that's happening, that's on ownership at the top. And the craziest thing is, I think Shad Khan cares a lot about this team winning, but he just can't get out of his own way with the moves they've made. And if you could bring in a Spielman, that's somebody that you can lean on that actually has done this for a long time, that you can trust with what he says. So I need to see that before I really believe in the turnaround.
I'm hoping for a Burrow-like impact from Trevor Lawrence. Now, not to say the Jags are going to make the Super Bowl next year because they don't have nearly as good
heard
a
it here,
team
folks.
As the Cincinnati Bengals do. But I am hoping that Trevor Lawrence is able to elevate the rest of that team and really get them on the right track because Jags fans have suffered long enough. Speaking of fans suffering, last team that we're talking about are the Houston Texans. As of 30 minutes before we hit record on this podcast, Lovie Smith, I don't know how the F we got here, man, but firing David Culley just to interview Brian Flores, interview Josh McCown, not hire either of them, and then just hire the assistant head coach, defensive coordinator who was already there.
He's just sitting there. Hey, guys.
Take it away, please.
Sure.
Talk before I rip them to shreds.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of hopeless, we went from the Jaguars to the Texans, and the order does matter here. I think the Texans right now look more grim than Jacksonville does. And, okay, I'll just tell you what I wrote in the rundown. Like, Trevor and I do a rundown for every show where we put our notes so we kind of know where each of us are going to be. And this was pretty easy for me. The first line says, I just can't figure out what they are building. I can't. Because you fired David Culley, who was the biggest fall guy hire of all time. And then you hire somebody on his staff. It feels like you're doing the same thing. Like, how is Lovie Smith set up for success here? Easterby's still in the building. Caserio, who apparently is like on the headset during games. I know that was a thing in New England as well. I just, like, what have we seen from him during this tenure? They have no players right now. The one of the good young players they had in Justin Reed, they basically have run out, right?
Yeah, like completely
alienated him. Benched him against the Jets this year because there was a disagreement. And Reed was like, "What? I didn't know that there was going on." I just don't know what they are trying to build, this just to me, Trevor, this hiring process, and I've heard this as well. This isn't just me just like guessing. They always wanted to hire Josh McCown, and they felt like, from perception, they couldn't. So then they tried to convince him to take an offensive coordinator role with them, and they were going to look at a, Gannon from Philadelphia or a Lovey type of hire so that it's almost like McCown can get some reps as an assistant,
right,
and then maybe be elevated one day. I don't think McCown was very interested in that. I'm not sure about that part of it. And they couldn't pull the trigger on the guy they wanted, and they just went with Lovey. And here we are in year 2 of what?
Unbelievable.
There's
so many one-year deals that this team has signed over the last year that it's really difficult to actually predict what they might be doing in the future because, you kind of mentioned, obviously, that's part of a rant to say what the hell are the Texans doing, but it's also a way of us saying, on this podcast, we wanted to take a look at all the hirings and say, okay, what did this mean for talent acquisition? Where are they
exactly?
Look? We don't know for the Texans. We still don't know. They are still completely up in the air. They're logical in how they go about their entire process. And so it's very hard to predict exactly what we're going to get from them. Now, to make matters maybe worse for the Texans, doing a little research, reading some quotes, reading up on Lovie Smith since he started with the Houston Texans. I don't know if this is good news for any Texans fans out there, but this is kind of what I found. Right now, there's only 4 players who are listed as starters on Houston's defense who are under contract for next season. There are so many one-year deals that they signed that we don't even know who is going to be back. All 3 of their linebackers right now, their starting linebackers, are unrestricted free agents. Now, if they bring Christian Kirksey back, who they did a lot to bring in, he was a team captain, okay, then they're probably going to have him be the centerpiece of that defense. But he's 30. He's 30 years old. So, honestly, man, they could hit linebacker heavy. Lovie Smith said before last season as the defensive coordinator, right? He talked about how the defense in Houston since 2011 has been a 3-4 defense. And Lovie said it's going to take time to transition the roster into what I want to run, the personnel that I want to run, which is very 4-3 heavy. A lot of Tampa 2 stuff, right? That's what Lovie is known for. And so it's going to be 4-man fronts. It's going to be some zone coverage stuff in the back. It's going to be a lot of 2 deep looks. And it's going to ask a lot from its linebackers. Lovie said that he is looking for, quote, skilled athletes at the linebacker position as the centerpieces of his defense. That's what he said a couple of months ago before last season. Connor, Devin Lloyd at number 3? I mean, that would be
trade out and take him.
Crazy to do. But the Texans have showed us that they have not been logical in their entire process up to this point. Devin Lloyd has graded out extremely well as a tackler, as a run defender, as a blitzer, and now as a coverage player this past season. If Devin Lloyd tests well, dude, I'm telling you, he's going to be in the conversation for whenever the Texans pick. Whether it's at 3, whether they trade back. You look at the best defenses that Lovie Smith has had, and there's been obviously 2 Hall of Famers, Brian Urlacher, Derek Brooks. He doesn't forget that. He does not forget that. He needs a centerpiece linebacker, and Devin Lloyd, for as well-rounded as he was, if he tests as a great athlete, I'm telling you, man, he's going to be in this conversation, as crazy as it is to say, with them picking at number 3 overall.
I think you're onto something here, and I think it's the fact that Lloyd is going a lot higher than we all think, right? It's almost like he plays linebacker, so we're like, cool, pick like 28, right? Like you just kind of, throw it up there like that, and it's like, okay, no, he's a freak, and like Trevor said, he's probably going to test really well, and if he does, I mean, I think we need to brace ourselves in a draft that is so wide open. And with the way the league is going, there will be coaches that just value that kind of player in the middle of their defense. And it goes back to what I said here. When things look this low, that usually means best player no matter the position. And I put Kyle Hamilton ? But the way you display it, and there's people that think Kyle Hamilton can play in the box or is a true, that's another conversation. The way you're displaying it is they just want a great player that they value as a foundational piece. And to them, that might be a linebacker.
Right.
So Lloyd at 3 is just, I love Devin Lloyd. And I know you're not advocating to take Lloyd at 3. You're just saying this is something you need to prepare for. I don't think that's nuts. Now, Caserio has been, I think, the most out in front of, we will answer the phone. The problem is, what is that for? Like, say Jacksonville does take a tackle and then the Lions take Hutch. Is somebody trying to jump the Jets for Thibodeau? Is somebody trying to jump the Jets for Icky? Then maybe they can get out. Right. And then they could take Devin Lloyd at whatever it may be. But I think you're right that this team is the most unpredictable in the entire top 10.
Yes. I'm just picking up the breadcrumbs, right? That's all I'm doing. That's all.
A little more than that. Yeah.
There's little hints, I think, that are right there to say us drafting the same player for the Texans might not be realistic, man. They might be just all over the place. I think the Kyle Hamilton could be the pick as well, but is Lovie's defense going to pick kind of this like hybrid player in number 3 overall? Maybe he is. Maybe he believes that he's a high impact player, but everything about Lovie's tenure, really, since he was the head coach at Chicago and Tampa Bay with Illinois as a defense coordinator, like it's been all about this kind of structure that he has had, I believe. And so, look, man, I wouldn't pick Devin Lloyd at number 3 overall. All I'm saying is we can never trust the Houston Texans, really, at this point in time. They have not earned our trust. So there we go. I mentioned that we probably weren't going to touch on the New Orleans Saints. I think Dennis Allen's getting that job. So I don't think too much changes with the Saints, even though Sean Payton obviously had a big hand in like how they drafted and who they drafted. I think their philosophy in New Orleans is generally going to stay the same there. Do you agree?
I do. I think that's why you make that hire, right? You don't want to rock the boat. You believe in what you have. You believe in the continuity on the defensive side of the ball, and then maybe there's some assistants there that you believe can keep that on the offensive side of the ball as well. So now, and without a true identity at quarterback, it's it's a little difficult to figure out what they want to be.
Right. Now, in a non-head coach personnel move, just today, which is Monday when we're recording this podcast, the Falcons have mutually agreed to part ways with Steve Sabo, who was their director of pro personnel, who also worked in college scouting beforehand with Thomas Dimitroff. And so he's been with the Falcons for the last 12 years. And with Terry Fontenot coming in as the general manager over from the New Orleans Saints, now we get Sabo out from the Falcons. Okay, now everything is gone, right? Dan Quinn is gone. Thomas Dimitroff is gone. Steve Sabo is gone. So I think that we're going to shift maybe a little bit more towards maybe some New Orleans Saints kind of draft strategies and implementations in Atlanta with what we're seeing with what Fontenot is doing there as general manager. So I just wanted to throw that in there at the end. That was fun, man. That was a blast. I hope we were able to enlighten people a little bit, give some people some background information that they had not known before, maybe give some panic to some teams and fan bases, but hopefully give you a lot more hope, because I think we do really like a lot of these hires, even if it was Jacksonville falling upwards into getting Doug Peterson. I think a lot of teams did well for themselves this cycle.
I love the midweek show because I think it's the most open one we do. Like when we come in hot on Mondays, it's always like, okay, this last weekend was crazy. Trevor and I haven't done a show in how many days together? It feels like forever. A lot of mock drafts. And on Thursdays, you're going to get really hardcore player evaluation. We've done the wide receivers. Should I tease what we're doing this week?
Go
All
ahead.
right, we're doing running backs this week. So you get your hardcore scouting and player evaluation and rankings and some player comps and some of those very pretty PFF stats. The midweek show is like, man, what do we want to do this week that no one else is doing, that is a little NFL, a little draft, a little bit everything in between? And this was a really good place to start.
Connor said it. Next podcast coming out on Thursday, and we are going to be breaking down this running back class. It's deep. There's a lot of guys to like, and as we've seen over the last couple of years in the NFL, it's not just these bell cow guys anymore, right? These big-time difference makers can come in all shapes and sizes from the running back room. A lot of teams are going to by committee now, so we're going to see a lot of guys that maybe didn't look like your prototypical RB1s who we might have really high in our rankings. We might be pounding the table for to say, hey, this is my guy in this class. So the way that we're going to do it, we're going to go through our top 5 running backs for the 2022 NFL draft, kind of set that standard there for as we go through the next couple of months, be able to talk about guys who are stock up, stock down as we watch some more film, as we get the combine, as we get pro days as well. But we're also going to give you some mid-round gems that we like, some late-round players, like late. I'm talking like 6th, 7th round running backs who we might be able to get there who could really help out the bottom of the depth chart, and just maybe some unsung heroes no matter where we see them getting drafted. That's all on Thursday's show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys then.